Hey there. Do you ever wonder how the rich seemingly get richer year after year while you're still struggling? Or do you wonder, what are you going to leave behind for your kids? What kind of legacy will you leave for your heirs? What about you'd like to know more about financial freedom through passive and residual income? If any of these are topics you'd like to know more about, but you don't know where to start, let's get connected. I have a 10-part strategy to grow, protect, and transfer wealth that I call Pitranomics. I'm Juli Pitra. Join me in my Facebook group, and let's grow together. See you soon. Hi, good evening, everyone. This is Juli Pitra with Pitranomics, and tonight is Thursday, close to 6 p.m. Central Time, and it's time for our Thursday talks. And tonight we're going to talk about what are you leaving behind? And as always, we're still transitioning with this new platform. We have a few snafus today, but I think it's going to go well eventually. And I'm really excited about today's topic because one of the biggest reasons we try as people to grow and protect and accumulate is to pass it on to someone or something when it's time for us to leave this mortal coil. So my first question, I'm just going to put it out there, is who do you want to leave something for? What people are important enough to you, or what causes are important enough for you that they get some of the residuals of your hard work that you're going through now, later after you're gone? And what do you think they're going to need in order to make use of what you leave them and carry on your purpose? Because I would assume, for example, you don't want to accumulate $1 million and serve a purpose that's the complete antithesis of your value system. For example, my mother was a really big proponent of education, and she thought about it. We didn't get around to it, but she thought about maybe, hey, let's set up a scholarship fund. But unfortunately, she was taken very early, died at 57 from cancer. So she didn't get around to setting up any kind of endowment. And to be truthful, I haven't really either, except that I have gotten my daughter through college, so I've endowed her with some scholarship. How about that? And my son is almost halfway through. He starts his junior year this fall. But I thought it would be awesome to have scholarship in the name of a woman who overcame so much, overcame a very, very humble beginnings, overcame not just poverty, but lack of a strong household to launch her into the world. Segregation back at that time was really strong. She did not get to go to the college of her dreams. I actually went to that college, didn't appreciate it probably as much as she did. She started out being a school teacher of mathematics at the junior high level, and then made a late in life career transition to programming, and ended up being a program for defense contractors for the military at NORAD in Colorado Springs. So, woman that had virtually no, I guess, dreams of becoming everything that she did, accomplished a lot, provided the light for a lot of people, because who knew somebody with such humble beginnings could grow up to be a great programmer helping the trajectories of rockets and satellites, which I think is pretty cool. I don't know how to do that. But anyway, wouldn't it be cool to have a foundation that provided scholarships, maybe for young people of similar circumstances? And like I said, I haven't done that yet, but that is something that people like to do. Think of every scholarship that you've ever gotten or heard about. Perhaps it was created by an endowment. Someone set aside not just money, but instructions on how to keep that endowment growing, and instructions onto what sort of person to bless with that endowment. So it's not just your heirs. You can leave behind something even greater than that. But you have to start with, who do I want to leave something to? What is important enough? That goes back to your end of life goals, because those people for whom you are dedicating your life and your values and your purpose, I believe with all my heart, should be included in those people to whom you make some sort of endowment or afterlife accommodations. But then what do you do? Many of us have probably either heard about from television or heard about in the news children who receive massive inheritances and don't know how to handle it and squander all the money. The trust fund babies that just aren't given the lessons and the structure to be able to take that endowment, that personal endowment, and grow it even further and make use of it. So it's not just what you leave behind, it's how you leave behind, it's to whom you leave behind, and how have you prepared the recipient to handle the endowment. That's equally as important to me as what is left and to whom. How are you preparing your recipients? So that's kind of where I want to start. Preparing your recipients. If someone is creating an endowment for their alma mater, their college that they attended, then chances are there's a lot of paperwork they have to go through. One, to transfer the assets, and that can be done through different entities. And please remember, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an estate planner, I'm not any of that. I just have some experience in creating some of these things for us. And next week we'll have, by the way, plug for next week, we'll have an attorney on, and you can ask her some questions about how to transfer money. And in particular, she has a very strong real estate background. So real estate is a way to transfer wealth to the next generation. So are stocks, so are proceeds from insurance policies. All of these things create wealth that you can then put in place for someone other than yourself. Now, let's go back to the education. And I like to start with my children. Sometimes, while my children were young and were teenagers, it seemed almost impossible to know that we were preparing them to receive the benefits of what we're trying to leave behind. Keep in mind, we are no Rockefellers, we are no Carnegies, but whatever it is that my husband and I have accumulated, we would like for our children to take that and grow for the next generation, not to squander in their generation. If it's your children you want to leave things for, you can't hide money from them. You have to have money conversations, budgeting conversations, life conversations with them, so they are equipped with the values. They become the structure. They are equipped with the values to carry on your wishes for that private endowment. You may want to consider, especially if you have small kids, as 15 years ago, my husband and I did, and we gave a lot of thought to, okay, what little we had accumulated, did we want it to go to, say, a 7-year-old? No. So we had to have someone in place, one, to give physical care and custody to our children and to raise them with the values that we were trying to impart. That's one part. And then on the other side, someone to take care of the endowment and make sure that they didn't squander it before they came of age to receive it. And so some people do have certain limitations on those endowments, those trusts, that maybe they don't want their children to receive it at age 18 or 21. Maybe they want to stagger it. You get one part at 35, another part at 45, another part at 55. So by then you have learned some maturity in handling money. Maybe you want them to be more tuned into working for the next generation and not just blowing what they get from you. You're thinking long term. Well, you have to train your kids to think long term. And this is not really a judgment, it's just an observation that parents who tend to raise their children to receive every square inch of their effort and money and time it's more difficult for those children to then be prepared to delay their gratification, um, and try to prepare for the next generation. So you have to start teaching your children early to be the proper structure and beneficiaries of whatever endowment you want to leave. When you leave it to a school, there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of instruction. Attorneys are involved, and they specify your wishes, and legal instruments are created to, for the most part, make sure your wishes are carried out. However, if you're not around to deliver that to the next generation, your kids, and you don't have an army of lawyers and school educators and whatever to make sure those wishes are carried out, how do you best do it? Well, let's start with the type of entity you put the funds into. Now, I have heard from so many people that they think, well, I don't have a lot, so it's not worth paying attorney's fees to transfer what little I have. I'll just write this handwritten will and that should be good. So, in the transfer of property, family practitioners and estate planning attorneys are experts at creating the entities to properly transfer assets to another party after death. Okay. Most of us individually, I know I myself, do not have that kind of expertise. I don't have history and experience and partners who have done it, making sure that after the death, the my intentions have been properly met. I don't have a lot of experience at that because I haven't died yet. So, what you want someone who is very adept at doing what it is you want them to do and conferring your wishes after you're gone is kind of a one shot thing because you can't come back and redo it unless your belief is that you can, and then you rely upon that. My belief is it's kind of a one shot thing. And so I like to do the best I can on this side of the dirt. Um, so, what many people that I know do is they put, if not all, most of their major assets into a trust, a family trust. There are other ways. All I'm saying is I don't know them. So, if someone were to say to me, well, I know somebody that did this and this, that could be cool. I don't know how to do that. So I worry about what I do know. If you make sure that and please keep in mind, I'm not an attorney, this is not legal advice, but if you make sure there is an entity that owns all of these assets when you're alive, then your passing doesn't affect the ownership. There's no need to go to probate. Your heirs are not going to be squabbling over what's left behind because it's already owned by the entity that's taking care of it once you're gone. In your lifetime, you could be a trustee or a beneficiary or both of the trust. But once you're gone, there are secondary, maybe even tertiary trustees in place, and your beneficiaries have already been identified. If you have, let's say, significant assets to leave behind, and maybe you're a bit concerned about your children's maturity with what's left or the maturity of the spouse that they choose. So, as negative as this might be, we have to take into account that sometimes marriages don't succeed long term. And there can be a lot of financial, emotional, etc., devastation from the result of that marriage not surviving. So, since that is a likely thing to consider, not something that you hope to happen, but it's a likely thing to consider, it should be a part of your thought process when creating whatever structure it is you want to pass on to your children. One way to do this is make your children identify the children, which are the beneficiaries of your trust. This can be somewhat of a painful conversation. So, but when my husband and I were creating our trust, we specifically wrote it for the two children that he and I have together, Jacqueline and Jacob Pitra. There are no other beneficiaries. I know the status of any other progeny that might have come from me. And I believe, don't, please, this is not a smear on anybody's husband. I believe my husband when he says he doesn't have any other progeny, but we all know that sometimes things can happen that you don't know about. So if you want to prepare for any possible progeny, you can. If you want to limit it to certain progeny, you can. It is not that, it's when you leave it to the fates and have a will, which can be contested because a will confers ownership from you to whoever your heirs are. A trust, for example, the ownership transfer has already occurred and the beneficiaries have already been identified. What is it you wish to do in that case? That's a choice. There is no right way, there is no wrong way. There is the best way to implement your wishes. So let's say you're lucky enough to amass, I don't know, 200 pieces of real estate and you have two kids. Well, here's one question. Do your children work well enough together in order to be entrusted with shepherding 200 pieces of real estate in which there are tenants and families or whatever? You have to be honest with yourself. You have to look at your kids. You have to figure out, okay, what is it that they're going to be able to do? Then maybe you put in place a manager and a successor manager, and you communicate your thoughts and wishes on how that property should be managed. But you still have to go back to the ones that are the beneficiaries. How do you teach your children to get along so that they don't destroy the legacy you've left behind? I know about a lot of families, I've heard about it, that after someone passes, there is a massive squabble about what's left behind. You can't affect that once you're gone, but you can maybe put in place those things that will help it not be as severe. So my husband and I tried. The proof is in the pudding. So as they are both adults, we will see, God willing, I'm still around, how well they work together to take care of the gifts that we plan to bestow upon them. Just in case we have some managers in place. That's just the nature of it. Doing this kind of planning for what you leave behind has part optimism because you're hoping that you're doing some good after you're gone, but you have to have some pragmatism. How exactly is this going to be used once I'm gone? What steps can I take? So let's start with one of the biggest. Let me do this. Let's start with one of the biggest assets that people tend to have. The average American, a lot of their wealth is in their family home. If they hold on to it for 20 years, or if they constantly reinvest in their family home, they can have 500, $1 million or more of equity in their house. But let's say it's 200,000 of equity. That means that the value of the home, less any obligations and the cost it would take to sell it, would result in a net of $200,000. And let's say you as a person never bothered to create a will because you thought I'd have time. We all do. We all think we'll have time. Or you believe that your kids will be able to get along well enough and implement that will that you've left behind. So I'm going to share a real life personal fact about me. I knew that there was a will when my parents created a will together. I saw it. I did not have my hands on a copy of it. And when my mother passed away, that will was not implemented. It was not put into probate. There's a limit of time on how long after a person passes that you can, what's the word? contested request for the will to be brought forth or whatever. I believe it was 4 years in Colorado. My mother passed in 96, so it's been well over 4 years. But that will, as I saw it, was never put in place. And my mother, who was an extremely intelligent woman, very pragmatic, she believed with all of her heart that my father and I would be able to work things out after she passed. And to be honest, for a while, I thought that would happen too. I don't really hold any grudges about it. My husband and I have been able to create some measure of security for our children that we hope they'll take care of. But because of that, I don't believe that sort of just leaving it up to fate or knowing that someone's going to do what you think they're going to do, that's not the best for me anymore. And nothing in my life, as far as financial, how shall I say, financial interactions, has changed that opinion in the least. In fact, it's made even more strong that you have to put in place the processes and the structure yourself in order to make sure that your wishes are taken care of. So that's with partnerships, that's with wills, that's with anything. Don't leave it to the interpretation of someone else. Be clear. And for me, right after my mother passed was not when I was in the emotional state to try and fight to put in place what I thought she wanted in place. It just, I didn't have it. And unfortunately, I have another example of a really, really good friend of mine um, who passed away a couple of years ago when she was 60. She was in the process. So, some backstory, she and her two siblings, a brother and sister, sister passed away. The sister actually left some instructions in her will as to what was going to be done with her estate. My friend and her brother and her mother contested that will, won that case, but then couldn't get along with each other long enough to disposition the property. And so there was squabbling, and then the mother passed away. So now there's two estates to settle. And my friend and her brother could never get along long enough to decide what to do with that. Went to court, fought. She finally, my friend, got the legal permission and wherewithal to be able to sell her sister's house. It had been a long fight. It was very stressful. The house was listed under contract. She was ecstatic. And then she passed away very suddenly, heart attack. Didn't expect it. Threw me for a loop. And, she and I had talked about it. We need to have structures in place. So if something happens to you because you're not married and you don't have children, what do you want done with what you've accumulated? And, another thing, I need to have a list of people to call. So if something happens to you, I love you and we're close, but I don't know the people that live around you and they don't know where I am. And it was always like, yeah, we'll take care of it. We'll do it someday, one day, this year for sure, this month. And the time slipped away and we hadn't taken care of it. And then she passed away. And I happened to have a conversation with the realtor. And at that point, I don't know what's happened. I'm not going to look into it because she's gone. But that brother was left with his sister's estate, his mother's estate, and now his second sister's estate. And he was blocking the sale. So the people who had gone under contract weren't sure they were going to close. The realtor was frustrated. I couldn't help. But she and I had these conversations repeatedly about this very topic. What do you want to leave behind? And she had wanted to leave behind whatever she had for her nephew, which was her estranged brother's son. So I guess it happened, but in the end, she no longer cares how her estate was disposed of, but she cared before. A lot of us think we're going to live forever or we can get to it sometime and we don't take care of it. And I'm going to share there are loose ends I need to take care of to make sure don't beat yourself up if you've not handled it perfectly, but try to make that a priority. Even if you don't feel like you have much, the little that you have, that you've worked to accumulate, how do you want it to be taken care of? Because I'll tell you this, it's a lot cheaper to see an attorney and set up the entity, maybe it's a trust, to preserve what you have than it is to leave it and then they're squabbling over it and they're spending time fighting and they have lawyers and they diminish the value and there's very little left. So, like I said, start with what you want to leave behind. That's important. To whom you want to leave behind. That's important. How you're preparing those recipients to receive a gift, because a large gift is not always easy to receive. Just imagine if someone said, "Hey, I have $2 million to give you." Your first thought is, "Oh my gosh, that is awesome. I have $200. I'm going to do this and this and that with it." But the reality is, if you're not used to dealing with large sums of money, what actually happens is you end up wasting it. So is that what you want to do? Is that what you want to have happen to whatever it is you accumulate? I hope not. So now's the time to start thinking about what it is we need to do to put our wishes in place. So the funny thing is, as of right now with this presentation, I cannot see the comments. So I'm going to remove it just for a minute because I can't see anything. Here we go. Oh, thank you for sharing about this amazing topic. Of course, I love talking about fun topics. But let me ask you this. Does anyone, maybe one of you on StreamYard, want to just throw out there, what do you want to leave behind? What is your goal? And you don't have to be specific, but is it property? Is it money? Is it an endowment? Is it stock, a stock portfolio? Does anyone have something that they'd like to suggest? Hey, I'd like to leave this behind. I know I just jumped in there, but does anyone want to offer something? Because if not, I'll keep going as I do. But
Well, I don't necessarily have anything specific, but I do want to start to think of what I want to leave behind, considering that I don't have heirs. I don't have nieces or nephews, so I'm like, what could I, what charitable organization can I partner with, or something like that to kind of, um, leave something behind to, or something like that. Is something to think about, because 9 times out of 10, people are thinking, oh, I'll leave this for my children, or let my nieces and nephews take care of that. But I don't have either. So I'm like, it does just give me something to think about as far as what do I want to leave behind, and to whom, or to what. So that was just something I wanted to mention.
I appreciate your sharing that. And for those of you that don't have like children or nieces and nephews, have you thought about extended family, a younger cousin, maybe a cousin that has children, or maybe a favored teacher's child, someone who's impacted your life who has heirs that maybe they can't provide as easily for? Or maybe it's just as simple as, where did you go to school? Maybe you were affected by an organization. When I was little, I was a member of Girl Scouts and I was also a member of the Brownies. Now, my memories of Girl Scouts, but I thought that the Brownies at the time was a great institution. I loved what it provided for tiny little girls that had no clue how to do anything in some kind of organized group. It was great. We had meetings, we had to learn how to um, adhere to proper decorum during a meeting. You can't just run around screaming, fighting. You had to learn how to, request permission to speak and to remain in order, and to parliamentary procedure, which I'm not even sure is taught in school anymore. I'd like to know, for those of you that have young kids, but it was a part of that organization. So how to participate in a group in a respectful way, I thought was a good lesson to learn. So if I didn't have kids in schools, something like that. I also joined an organization that meant a lot to my mother, was Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, of which I am a member, of which my mother was a member. Um, she talked about leaving something behind, not so much for a particular chapter, but in the form of a scholarship at the school where she attended. Believe it or not, I mean, this is kind of frightening to say. I don't even know if that school still exists. Excuse me a minute. She went to Morris Brown College in Atlanta. Does anyone know? I know that Clark closed, I think, or was it Morris Brown? Let's see. It is a private Methodist, historically black liberal arts college in Atlanta, Georgia. So they use the present tense. I'm assuming that it's still around. So that could be an endowment if I didn't already have two major endowment suckers that I call my son and my daughter. So pretty much everything that we have, aside from some nominal, I guess, gifts to my alma mater, Georgia Tech, and the school where my husband and I met, Washington University in St. Louis. Other than those two schools, the bulk of it is going for our children and hopefully our grandchildren. And the method that we have used, it's not perfect. That's not the point, that it's perfectly executed, is that you're constantly working toward it. Don't just leave it for another day. Like the fact that my daughter's graduated from college, it's time to revisit, you know, maybe make some changes. So they are the beneficiaries for the most part of the bulk of what my husband and I have tried to accumulate. And I hope they understand that it's not necessarily for them to go, woohoo, we're going to have a good time with this, but to prepare for the next generation. The steps that we have taken, my husband and I, to prepare our children, is we've been fairly honest. Yes, we have accumulated some measure of comfort. No, you are not a Paris Hilton type trust fund baby. You won't be traveling the world with a small dog in your arm on private jets, not a care in the world. That will not be you. You will need to work because, one, you won't really receive anything until you are at least 35 years of age. And my oldest daughter is 22. So she has a while before. I mean, that's assuming we were to pass away today, which we're not assuming that. But if we were, she still has to make her way in the world between now and 35 and still make her way past 35, because our view is you don't need such large gifts at one time, such to blow. So staggering is a type of structure which you can create if you seek an estate planning attorney that's used to the types of things that you have to do, that you want to do. Let me throw a challenge out there because I actually did this one time. I read, what is his name? Jane Fonda's father. What was his name? Peter Fonda? No, something, whatever. The elder Fonda. A few years ago, I read his last will and testament. Don't ask me why I did that. I was like, okay, what did he leave behind? Um, I think his kids were a little blindsided by not only what he did with his fortune, but how he communicated what he did and why. I think that Henry Fonda, thank you, that's right. I think it's important to prepare your kids. So don't blindside them. Let them know what your intentions are, what your values are behind it, what your thoughts are behind it, so that they are prepared and not fighting each other on this. Um,
I have a
it's a good
question.
read. Yes. Hmm.
How did you determine who was going to get what?
From our two kids,
Yes.
50-50. So we
Like
have two.
say for, like
Mhm.
say for, okay, like the house. Like something happened in the house, dealing with the houses or the vehicles,
Oh, I
right?
see what you're saying. No, it's not a matter of, it's like who gets the house. And that's an excellent question. They are beneficiaries to an estate 50-50. The estate will own, the trust will own all of these assets, the proceeds of which are 50-50. So let's say after we're gone, the next trustees, which are not my kids, by the way, right, decide it's time to sell this house and put the proceeds in the trust, our family home. Then those proceeds, invested hopefully very prudently, will be dispensed to them 50% when one turns 35, 50% when the next turns 35. So it's not that they get the house, they get the proceeds.
So you
Your
have what is called trust manager that
hmm?
manage the trust in their benefit
Trustees,
for their benefit.
trustees, your secondary and tertiary trustees manage your trust.
Trustees.
Trustees.
Okay.
So you have this entity that owns stuff. You have the trustees that are directing everything in that trust. So you have to choose that wisely as well. You know, before I go forward, let's go back to a couple of iterations. When my children were young, my husband and I, we had this conversation and we were like, okay, who do we want to be in charge of their physical custody, to raise them, to love them, to nurture them? That was a different choice than someone, hey, we want someone to oversee whatever financial benefits accumulations we leave behind. For us at that time, when our kids were younger than elementary school, those were two separate people, because young children need something different than, say, teenagers do. Once they got to, I think it was middle school, I want to say middle school, we changed the people. Once they got into high school, late high school, we changed the people again. So it's an ongoing process. And it's not just, okay, we are currently the trustees, my husband and me. The next secondary trustees should have something happen to us. And then you have tertiary trustees should something happen to them. So that's forward thinking. Talk about the real estate that I have tried to accumulate, the rental real estate that is ultimately controlled by the trust, and the property manager is in place. And I've actually had a conversation with that property manager about that, as well as another property manager, should that one not be available, because the property has to be managed. It is a house that you live in can be sold and disposed of very easily, but a house that has a tenant, or a property that has a tenant, has to be disposed of while respecting the relationship between the landlord and the tenant, the landlord being the entity that owns it. So not necessarily a person, it's an entity. And when you say, how do we decide who gets what? So there's annual valuations of the trust and its assets. And so maybe a bolt of lightning strikes both of us today. There's a valuation in place as of December 31st, 2022. Based on that valuation, this is how much the beneficiary is entitled to, which they won't receive anytime soon because they're not 35.
I got another question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, when you and your husband first got married and y'all started acquiring, properties and some form of wealth and whatever, how did you come about making your choice to find an estate planning attorney, or establish a rapport with someone you trust as an attorney to set all of this up and do this for you? And how
That's
long did
also,
it take?
well, first of all, it's an ongoing iterative process. The person we felt comfortable with the first time we created a will was not necessarily the person we felt comfortable with going forward with a more complex structure. We, word of mouth, people that we respected, whose handling of their own finances seemed extremely impressive to us were those we asked for advice. In fact, I'm trying to think. I don't know who it was. Well, let me just start back with this story. Back when Jacob was before he was walking, so he was in the stroller, and my daughter was a toddler. My husband and I used to go for walks a lot. Now, I probably should still do that, but I don't. Um, and one day we were walking at a park, and there was a couple there, an older couple, probably about my age now. They were grandparents, and they had their kids. And so I fell into conversation with them, and I asked them, what's the secret of a long lasting marriage? Because they seemed fairly well, they were amicable, and there wasn't this grand passion where they were kissing in the parking lot. I would have been a little suspicious if there had been, but they seemed like a well matched, comfortable, and they gave off an air of security and comfort. So I asked them, what's the secret to a long term marriage? And they were like, respect. There were three things: respect, affection, and you take care of your finances. They recommended some books, and they recommended an investment advisor. One of the books they recommended was The Millionaire Next Door. The man there said it changed his life. And they recommended an investment advisor. And I wish I remembered her name. So we were like, oh my gosh, we're so excited. We went to go see her, only to be told that we didn't have enough assets to be a viable client for her. But she recommended someone else who then gave us some advice, very prudent, fiscally conservative person. So she matched well with us. When it comes time to choose a professional, they need to exude some of the same qualities that you either do or want to have. So the financial planner that we ended up working with was from money, but very conservative, very frugal, very forward thinking, really solid on budgeting and insurance and all that. And her name is Michelle Goldstein, and her company used to be Financial Futures. I'm not sure what she's still doing, because once we got to a certain point, she was basically, you've kind of graduated beyond my need to help you. So then we started shopping around, and one of my husband's colleagues recommended the person that we're with now that I hope to have on one day. He's Stephen Ingro of Beacon Financial. But like I said, the first person that was recommended to us, by the time we got to the point where she would have considered us a client, we no longer felt we were a match. She wasn't the type of person I wanted to steward us into the next phase of our growth. And my husband agreed wholeheartedly. And then we started shopping around. Another fun story. This was with a company that had some financial planners. And this young man that was speaking to us was very sharply dressed, slick haircut, great manicure, perfect suit, and was starting to tell us what we should do with our money. And I was looking at him and I just said, how much money do you have? Show me your balance sheet. Do you own a home? Are you married? Do you have kids? What's your current net worth? How has it changed year over year for the past 5 years? What's your anticipation? And he just looked at me. He was like, well, no, I don't own a home. I'm not married. I don't have this net worth. I was like, well, how are you going to give us advice when you haven't even gotten to where we are? I actually got up and left because we had paid for a babysitter to go talk to that person. And I was done. I got up and left. My husband left after me, but I was done. It's like, this person's not going to absorb any of my brain space. You can't give me advice based on experience. And it was kind of a big churn and burn company. I want somebody that's going through what we're going through, that has kids. Like, for example, my pediatrician who took care of my kids has kids the same age as my kids. It's important to me to be where I am or be where I'm headed. So my husband's coworkers, all very financially frugal, fiscal, conservative people, recommended the investment advisor that we're with now. So we got several recommendations. We probably interviewed, I want to say, at least 4 in person, because we had some phone calls. You can weed people out on the phone if you ask enough questions and you're provocative enough in your questions. So I think we interviewed like 4. We both liked him. Guess what? Had kids, was saving for college, very conservative. Um, it was a fit. And we've been with him, I want to say, golly, I want to say at least 12, 13 years, maybe longer. And he has been a great steward of our finances from a stock portfolio kind of view. So we have a brokerage account with him, we have assets with him, and we have our real estate that we've amassed, and we have insurance policies. So as things get more complicated, when you start out, Eben, we had nothing. I was barely able to feed my husband because, as David knows, he eats a lot and used to eat more. And I could barely afford to keep him fed based on the money we had. So, well, no, that's not quite true. Based on the money we permitted ourselves to spend, because we started out with very strong savings goals, even from the beginning, that we didn't have anything. So my mother was a firm believer that you paid yourself first, and his parents were firm believers you didn't spend anything you didn't absolutely positively have to on threat of death. So those two philosophies came together and essentially are the basis of Pitranomics. I do believe you need to enjoy life a little bit, but my husband would not spend a single penny that didn't require absolute sustenance. So I balance him out, he balances me out. Which brings me back to another strategy, which is who is in your lifeboat. Your choice of a life partner and how well you're able to communicate are intricately linked. Because if you don't choose the right partner, separating from that partner can be very expensive. Not to mention, if you're not of one accord financially, you don't act in that way, and you squander a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of energy, not in pursuit of whatever your couple goals, family goals are. My husband and I have, if there is nothing else, we tend to be just like this in the goals that we want to accomplish. Sometimes like this on how we accomplish them, but just like this in what we want to accomplish. So, first things first, I'm very blessed to have a solid spouse choice. And I'm going to go out and say, so was he. Okay. Make no mistake, is also blessed. And then, even when we couldn't agree on who should take out the garbage and who should clean up dishes after dinner and who should make vacation question or plans or anything like that, even when we couldn't agree on any of that, we always agreed on family goals and financial goals, which is still a blessing to this day. Because we were of one accord, the advice that he got from his coworkers, because I didn't have a circle at that time, I was a stay-at-home mom. I had abdicated from career when I married my husband. We kind of were looking for the same things, people who could lead us, either who were on the same journey and seemed promising, or were ahead of us on the journey that we wanted to pursue. Long-winded answer, but my partner in crime and I were of one accord. And since we were of one accord, we were able to pursue options together. Now, there's another book I will recommend as a platform book. And by that, I mean it helps you think about things in a different way. And it's called Get Financially Naked. And I used to have several of those books. I gave them out. I think I might have 2 left in my office at home. It is a great book to read together to realize everybody comes in with preconceived notions on how money should be spent and how a household should be run. And it's very, very hard to have a conversation when your partner's views basically attack and slay all of your sacred cows about how things should be done. So that's why I call that a good platform book. Learn how to speak about your differences, your different assumptions, those assumptions so ingrained, you don't even believe them to be assumptions, you believe them to be truths. But when you come from, say, this household and another person comes from this household, you have to develop those truths. There's no truths. There's what you come together to develop and why and for whom. And that becomes your truth of that household. And it's and here's a perfect example. Um, when I left the job I had to go live with my husband in Switzerland, I really didn't know what I was getting myself into because my mom had been the major breadwinner in the family. And that was what I was used to, a woman that made most of the financial decisions and provided most of the financial direction. Okay, great. Nothing wrong with that. But my husband didn't come from that. My husband came from where the woman was very intelligent, very well respected, but the father did most of the leading and the direction as far as financial decisions. So when we came together, we had to have a lot of communication because he expected certain things and I expected certain things, and those things didn't agree. And there was strong friction, we'll leave it at that, about those things that we didn't agree on. And so we needed to learn how to communicate past our assumptions to some sort of agreement so that we could keep going. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that our road was absolutely smooth with no bumps whatsoever. And our communication has always been perfect, because that would be a lie. But I think we've gotten to a point where we respect each other, we value each other's opinions, we believe that we have the same end goal in mind. And sometimes we just have to have those really hard discussions about what to do next. And I respect my husband enormously. I am not going to try and circumvent what it is he thinks is best on a whim. We are going to discuss it. I'm not saying we always get to agreement smoothly, but part of being able to have those hard discussions is having respect for your partner and knowing that you are both headed in the same direction, and that through communication and negotiation and some compromise and some, I guess, growth, you're going to be of one accord in pursuing that goal eventually. You just have to believe in that if you choose right. And you have to choose right by knowing what it is you need and what it is you want, where you're headed, and finding out about that other person before you get hitched to them. Okay, so I don't know what that was. I don't know if I answered that question. It was kind of long-winded, but how we chose people was together. How we came together with our goals was by communication. How we decided who got what was through communication. One of the reasons I found Henry Fonda's will so fascinating is the favoritism he showed in his last will and testament, and that he basically left money to the child, at least the way I read it, that accomplished the least because they needed the most help. And, I had a conversation about that with my husband. I was like, a failure to succeed is not a reason for largesse in my book. And my husband agrees. So we were like, yeah, there we go. So we didn't have to argue about that. I was quite surprised. But if you have the opportunity to read a couple of high profile last will and testament documents, they can be a little fascinating. They can be a lot fascinating. Why would they make those choices? How do they make these choices? Do these choices have any impact on what you might want to do? Not that I have Henry Fonda type of money, but the way he decided to dispose of his fortune was, I thought, pretty interesting. And then there are people like, let's say, Prince, who died with a massive fortune, but died intestate with no will, no structure to protect his estate once he passed. I have to think he was intelligent enough to know that, but maybe that was intentional. It could be a choice to die intestate. It is not our choice. We want things set in place. And that could be that both my husband and I have a little bit of control freakery in us, ever so small amount. So I hope I got around to answering your questions, which were very good questions. So, Eben, first of all, do you have more than one child?
I have three.
You have three. Okay.
And it's funny you got to talking about this. It's so weird because this is something I have been looking at for the past year because, I went through a divorce some years ago, never got married again. It's been over 22 years. My ex-wife, the woman I was married to her for almost 20 years. So it's been long enough since I've been divorced, been married, and I have three. I did acquire some property, some vehicles, and some finances, and that's something that has come up within the last year quite a bit, as far as what am I going to do if something ever happens to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was asking you for a reason. When you was telling us about the process of the estate planning attorney, and then the question I was asking you, how long from the point you started looking to the point you landed on the person you're comfortable with, how long did that process take?
Ooh. The first estate planning attorney we chose took us about 30 days to find. The appointment itself was grueling, the first one, because we hadn't been kind of prepared to think the way to answer the questions that he had. So it was like a 2-hour appointment. We had homework that took us about, I want to say 3 weeks. And then within 3 weeks after that, we had our first will and testament. The one that we next worked with was a little more hands-off. He didn't try to provide direction. He did as he was told. And that person came through our investment advisor. And like I said, it's now time for us to come to another one. And that I have a name that I really want to work with. I have spoken to him a couple of times. He's very knowledgeable about creative financial instruments that I'm curious about. And he came recommended by, I would say, at least 3 other families in my neighborhood who have kids that they're wanting to provide for. I've not met him on the phone, so we haven't been able to arrange to meet with him in person yet and go through the process. But I anticipate that we'll probably get there before the end of the year, and that it will be roughly a 2-month process to put in place what I'm almost sure he's going to suggest that we do.
Okay.
Because there's massive transfers of ownership that need to happen. And I think that you should revisit that topic after every major life change and every 10 years, whichever is less. So I'm turning 60 next year. That's for me a pivotal year. And that's when I tend to just kind of blow through things on my decade birthdays.
Yeah.
So made changes at 50, major. I make changes at 40, but allow 4 to 5 months from the time you start looking to the time you find someone, to the time you go through the process, because you have to dig through some stuff to be able to implement what they're going to say.
Huh?
For example, okay, so depending on how complex you want to go, you could just have a trust, everything owns a trust. and it's simple. But if you have businesses and the businesses happen to be in their own outside entities, you have to work out, okay, who owns those businesses. And for each person, that's going to be a different choice. There is no one-stop shopping. But I know people that have, 4 to 5 holding companies, 40 to 50 second level holding companies, and then each business has an entity. Sorry, each business is owned by an entity, and owns a property, owns a business or whatever. And so you might have 4 or 5 levels of complexity. I don't have that. And I know somebody that has just one LLC that owns everything. And they're like, we don't care. We just want it all in one LLC. It's fine. You have to have a discussion with your legal and tax specialist to find out what's best for you, because it's not going to be the same. Like, you and I couldn't have the same decision because you're not married and I am. And you have to consider the fact that you want to leave something to beneficiaries, but the beneficiaries are tied to someone that maybe you do or do not want to be a trustee. I don't know. So that's why you need to have that very frank conversation with the professionals. And a book like Get Financially Naked helps put you in the right mindset. So even though you're divorced from their mother, say you want to get married in the future. And in the future, you're like going to have that conversation with that wife. Baby, I love you, but everything I've built is for my kids. So we're going to create a little something over here for you. Just know that my wishes and my intention and the structure I'm building is that I'm supposing the lion's share is going to my kids, but I will provide to a certain extent for you. And that's what it's going to be. It's not a will. It's a structure. It's already there. Wills can be contested.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
Yes, you know.
Been there and done that one too. Yeah. Got
And
ugly.
what's really interesting, and I don't know if I'm going to get backlash for saying this, but my father and I are not really that close. And his brother died last week or this week. Not really sure. Saw it on Facebook. We weren't close either. But I remember when their mother passed, she was living in a house that my parents had bought for her, and they were 50% on title with her, with rights of survivorship in the state of South Carolina. And what I found very interesting was the morning, well, my grandmother, my father's mother, was living with us at the time, but she was in the hospital. When my father called his brother to let him know that my grandmother had passed, it was in the morning, like 9 o'clock Colorado time. And before noon Colorado time, there was a call from an attorney trying to make sure that my uncle's interests in the property were protected. The day my grandmother died. He has now passed, and he's got, kids and grandkids, and I have no idea what's going to happen because I haven't seen him since my mother passed. But I found that interesting that he had the wherewithal to contact an attorney to find out what's going to happen to my portion of mother's house. And I was like, that ain't mother's house. Because my mother was a savvy woman. And she was like, there's no parts of that shares ownership. Now, there's a lot of property acreage in South Carolina that I know was supposed to come to the family. I believe it was supposed to go to my father. I think I'm my father's heir, but I know I'm not going to see any of that. And I don't care. Don't want to fight for it. If I want property in South Carolina, I'll go buy it, but I don't want it. But people squabble over remnants and get really vicious over tens of thousands of dollars. What happens when there's hundreds or even millions? That's why you have to put your wishes in place. So if I were you, I don't know how old you are, but depending on the age of your kids, you need to have a conversation with them too. This is what I intend to do. I wouldn't phrase it as what would you like for me to do, because that's not how I phrase the conversation with my kids. This is what I intend to do. I am letting you know that this is in place. You have been informed. There you go.
Okay. And I am having a little trouble hearing you. I had a call and it knocked out my sound.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. What I said was you need to start having a conversation with the people you intend to be beneficiaries of whatever you leave behind. Letting them know what your intentions are, and then putting those intentions in place. Now, you're in Texas. I can send you the name of the estate planning attorney that I intend to meet with. I feel highly of him, but I would also seek the advice of others who have very similar situations to yours and who they use that they've been happy with, or even who they've not been happy with. Because sometimes through a divorce, there can be residual financial shackles that you have to consider. I don't know, you've been divorced from what you say a while, but sometimes you can't just take your ex-wife or ex-husband off your life insurance policy. Or maybe there's property that can't be unentangled. I don't know. That's why you need to be able to have that very frank conversation with your intended beneficiaries, so you are then prepared to have that conversation with your estate planning attorney.
Wait a minute, Patrick. I cannot hear
You couldn't hear? Well, you know
Let
what?
me, I'm going to get off and come back on.
That's okay.
My sound was knocked out.
Sound was knocked out? Okay. So
hold on, just give me a minute.
No problem. No problem. I will say this, and I had a whole presentation. Let's see. Let me just go through it real quick and see. Oh, it was beautiful too. Thank you, Shamir, for creating this beautiful presentation. But the important thing I realized is it's time to plan right now. The future is not given. So plan now. You can always change your plan, adjust the plan, massage the plan, but have a plan and figure out what it is you want to do with the accumulation that you have come up with. So it could be property, it could be insurance, it could be stock, it could be a lot of stuff. Make a plan. Discuss your plan, implement your intentions. And this is where the attorneys come in, because they may have a solution for you that you haven't thought of. But then once they share it with you, oh, this is what could possibly work, given what you want to do. And you're like, yeah, that's exactly it. Then you're set. But keep in mind, the longer you live, the more you might still change those intentions. So it's always called, for example, your last will and testament, meaning it's the last one you did, not the last one you'll ever do. Keep it updated. Keep your insurance beneficiaries updated. Reevaluate. A financial planner will be able to kind of discuss with you some of the pitfalls or obstacles with transferring certain types of assets. Okay. I will tell you, most of the time when I see somebody selling a massive portfolio of real estate, it's not what they've accumulated, it's what they've inherited. So keep in mind that it's very likely they won't continue to manage it the way you have. So put in place some liquidation plans as well.
All right, there were some comments in the private chat. I don't know if you saw them from
I
Shantae.
can't see them. Yes, please.
Okay. So she said, everything you said is so true. I'd like to leave my 9 nieces and nephews a college fund, and if they don't go to school, I'll put it in the will and trust and have certain provisions. She also said I would like an annual scholarship to an HBCU and prepay for mortgage services so people don't have to worry while they're grieving. That's a very important point.
Ooh, okay. Thank you for bringing that up, because I have a friend whose one of his parents passed away very suddenly. It was just a horrible accident. And the squabbles that ensued So there's the squabbling over the property, and then there's the grieving. And nobody's making their best decisions in the middle of grief. So that by itself is a reason to put your intentions in place so that when your heirs are grieving for you, their maybe less than responsible decisions don't impact negatively or materially your intentions. Because it's going to, when my mother passed, I wasn't thinking straight. I can barely remember the first 5 months, 6 months after she died. I know I got through them, but I don't remember them. I was operating in a fog. I probably did not make the best decisions regarding anything about her estate. I was just reeling from the loss. So try to put some things in place so that they clickety click happen without your being there and while your heirs are distracted by grief. I will say this: there are predatory investors that look for funerals and stuff like that to try to acquire assets cheaply because they know the heirs are distracted with grief. Prepare for that.
I can believe that because we are never prepared. Most of us, you know, it's good that you're having this we're having this discussion today because in most cases, most of us aren't prepared. So God forbid if something was to happen, you know, all of a sudden, you know, we lose a loved one, you know, me or whomever, and all, you know, we have, you know, things to leave behind. Well, once we're gone, we're gone. I mean, you know, of course it's going to be squabbling, especially if we don't have things put in place. You know, I have 3 children, but I have 5 grandchildren. But between me and the missus, we have 15. You know, my living girlfriend, whatever. But the point,
Wait, do not call her whatever on public.
no, I'm not talking about her. I'm talking about
Okay. Okay.
the situation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so it can get complicated real quick. You know, so that's why, and it's a good discussion that we're having tonight because it's bringing about awareness for me, and I guess those of us who are on this, that I really do need to dive deeper into this and make a decision on what it is I need to do going forward, because this is something that we probably could talk about again.
Oh, we will. We'll cycle through it again next quarter, and I would really like to have an estate planning attorney on. But you have to be at the right place to have a conversation with the estate planning attorney. And I'll say this: I know of a friend. I'm not going to disclose much about him. We've had conversations about him. He has children from his ex-wife, but he also has children from his current girlfriend, and I think another child somewhere in there from somebody else. So there's children with different mothers who all have the expectation that now that he, you know, has this accumulation, he's going to take care of all of them the same way, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, my comments to him was like, well, you got to have some tough conversations, announcing your intentions and put them in place. I said, you know, I don't know what it is you want to do. You got to figure that out. I'm trying to put myself in that position, and I'm going to be straight up honest. I'm taking care of my kids that I birthed. Yes. Somebody comes up and says, I'm the child of Andre Pitra, and I'm 40 years old, or maybe not 40, you know, however old he is or she, and comes up and I deserve blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, baby, I'm so sorry. You're late. You should have come early. That door has shut.
Only have 3 of my own, and all from the same woman. That's it. So that complication I don't have to worry about. Now the young lady that stays with me, she has mentioned several times, well, you know, I've been with you for a while, but what about me? What about me? And I said, got me thinking.
Well, so Shantae asked the question in the private chat. She said, if something happened to you, can your girlfriend stay in your house or give her a time frame for her to move?
That was also asked. Good question.
And it's a conversation you need to have.
Yes, it's a conversation that I definitely do need to have because it brought me back to, as
Hmm.
Arcadia Hall used to say, the things that make you say,
That book, Get Financially Naked, was for me pivotal in talking, because at the time I was trying to be a financial mentor, to get people to talk to each other about uncomfortable financial aspects. One of those, one family in particular that I remember, was that the husband had a child from a previous marriage. She had a child from a previous marriage. They had children together, but he was a stay at home. She was a stay at home wife, and he was the breadwinner. And when they first came to see me, his attitude was something like, well, her child by the other marriage, that's just her child. I'm taking care of my kids. I'm the breadwinner, blah, blah, blah. And so one thing I said was, well, are you sure that you two are of one accord on this decision? Let's ask you some questions. Let's refer to page such and such and discuss our varying assumptions, and she did not realize at all. I could tell her reaction was genuine and loud, that he felt no responsibility at all to her other child because he was very much, father takes care of his kids. This other child has a father. Father's going to take care of that one. I'm going to take care of mine. I can honestly tell you, I don't know how I would feel in that situation. Because when you have kids, you want all of them to feel equally loved and whatever. But the truth of the matter is, this is one father and this is another. I don't know how people manage that. Um, I know that if something were to happen to my husband and I formed an attachment with somebody else, his kids ain't getting nothing. My beneficiary's already set. But that's just me. I don't know if that's everybody's viewpoint.
no, you're right. Everybody's footprint is different. So,
Yes.
and I do agree with that. So that is a discussion that you definitely have to have, and some understanding has to be established. You know, in that. So, but everybody's structure is different as well. So it's
Hmm.
based on what your family structure is and your foundation, your family foundation is. Before you even move into that. So yeah, I mean, I
And the
get it.
benefit of professionals, if they've had access to a lot of different people and a lot of the different structures, anybody that tries to sell you this one solution will fit for everybody is a fraudster. Don't listen.
No, no, I
Yeah.
get that.
So don't listen to that. You need to have first a frank conversation with each other and then the frank conversation with the professional in order to implement your intentions.
Okay.
Shamir, were there any other comments that I can't see, or is that it?
One more. The other family member might not care enough to consider her housing and ask the person to leave with limited notice. So that was just to add on to the previous comment.
And again, going back to my own family, so my grandmother, my maternal grandmother's husband was not my mother's father. My mother's
Mm-hmm.
father was somebody, I don't know him. He decided he didn't want to know us. Okay, cool. But and apparently this is common, but my mother's husband, they were still married, but they weren't living together. And he was living with another woman. And they had been in that situation for years. Let me just blanket out all the dirty laundry. So my grandmother's second husband was living with somebody else. He came by and dropped off money, was very sweet to me and loving to my mother, but he actually lived and had this whole relationship with this other woman. And when he died, my grandmother was his heir and this sole heir, right? But he had had this house and life with this other woman. My mother when my grandmother asked her, Jackie, what do you think I should do? My mother said, "Hey, why don't you just give her the house? I mean, she's been staying with, oh God, I've forgotten his name. I know his real name, but I forgot what they used to call him. He had a nickname that was more ubiquitous than his real name. Well, when Mr. Leaks died, my mother was like, "Oh, just quit claim the house to her so she can have somewhere to," because she was older, so she won't be thrown out of the house she's known. Thank goodness for that woman that my grandmother went to her own daughter and not to me, because I'd have been like, how quickly can we get her out? We can sell that. Let me tell you what we can do with those assets. So you're right about one thing. It would have been good if Mr. Leaks had looked after her interests and made sure she had a place to live. Luckily, my mother, the kind and generous person that she is, was like, I'll just give her the house, But that's because they were comfortable. They didn't need that house or the money from that house. But let's say my mother and father were, dead broke and scrambling, then that would have looked like a nice little windfall that they felt, well, we are the heirs, let's go take it. And that woman, I'm not addressing the issue of how they all live together. I'm just saying she wouldn't have had a home. And at the time, I think I was maybe less than 20 or around 20. My 20-year-old self probably would have put her out. Should have seen to your interests before then. How come you weren't handling your business? Now I probably would have said, oh, well, yeah, I want to make sure that you're comfortable. You were very good to Mr. Leaks and he loved you. And, but some of it's maturity. But I definitely would not have wanted now to be on the end of 20-year-old me making decisions on my behalf. So there's that. Shamir, are there any other comments? That was a good one. I like that. And this is a great topic. I mean, hopefully when I bring on the estate planning attorney, I'll have the foresight to make sure I get a lot of questions pre-asked so I can present them to him and he can give like little mini case studies. But yeah, like I said, maturity is important, and when you consider what you're leaving to someone, consider the maturity of the person that you're leaving it to and their value system. You have to take that into account. So let me add you back to see, Evan, if you had any other questions, because otherwise we're like half an hour over. We'll wrap it up.
Well, we can discuss this some other time because I have a lot, but I'm going to table those till the next time we talk about it.
Okay. And then I want to add one other wrinkle that my family and I deal with is that not everybody that is impacted is a U.S. citizen. So you need to speak to someone if you have non-U.S. citizens in the mix. And make sure you're considering the rules of governance and property and transfer in that other country. And that might help you narrow down who you use because you'll want someone with that kind of experience. Just like when my husband became a U.S. citizen, we had to deal with an immigration lawyer. I don't think the average American is like, oh, we need a good immigration lawyer. That's usually someone who's an immigrant. They have very specific requirements and needs that need to be addressed in a way that most people don't even bother to think about. Now my husband is a citizen. Can't remember what year that was, but I want to say maybe 2005, 6, somewhere in there. So, but we have assets to consider in other countries. Those are conversations that had to be had. Well, anyway, this has been fun. Thank you for the questions. By the way, just so you know, I love questions. There is never a time when I'm going to say, no, I don't want to hear your questions. If you have them, put them in the private chat, put them in the group chat, get them to me. I will discuss them as sensitively as I possibly can and, prepare and retain anonymity on your behalf. Just don't think there's something that you're experiencing that nobody else has experienced or nobody else can benefit from hearing about. That's why I talk a lot about what we've gone through. I mean, I didn't used to. I'm still pretty private, but I do share some things because I know they help. And that's what Pitranomics is all about. It's a community to learn and grow. So if you're listening to this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're not listening to this on YouTube, please go to my YouTube channel, like and subscribe. I'm trying to grow my audience. I think that the message is useful for a lot of people because I'm interacting with people that have knowledge and experience that I don't have. I'm bringing what I have. This is a community that can grow. So thank you so much.
I do have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
On your Facebook, Pitranomics on your Facebook or whatever, the guests that are on here and the people that are on here, your regulars or whatever, can we bring a guest?
Yes, always. Just send them the link.
Okay.
Always, always. I decided to start going public. What was that, June, the beginning of June? So before it was like private, because I had to go through an evolution of being able to talk. And now I'm putting stuff out there that once it's out there, I lose control of the narrative. And it's frightening, but I also enjoy doing this. This pours into my cup to do this.
Okay.
So please bring guests. In fact, blast it on your page and share and say, at least come to one and see if there's something that resonates. And maybe they'll become regular visitors and maybe they'll become speakers. Because one time I had an organizer on, and she was like, really? What does that got to do with wealth? And I'm like, well, my strategy is to grow, protect, and transfer wealth. And your resources are money, energy, and time. And disorganization, in fact, impacts all of those resources. So and again, I'm not perfectly organized. I'm a walking maelstrom of chaos at times, but I'm better than I used to be. So there's improvement. And so once you improve, you get to grow. Once you improve even more, you grow even more. And that's what I'm all about right here. So yes, please share. Put it out in an email. Right now, I'm ready to spread my audience. If you've got an idea for a guest speaker, send that to me as well. Sometimes a guest speaker is someone that's been through something, and you can learn from what they've been through. In fact, the first time I did a Pitranomics, I did it in a room at a title company's office. And there was a woman there that shared her story. It was horrific, horrible divorce. Married a man, didn't work out, wanted a divorce. The family attorney on her part messed her up, had her in a situation where she deeded the property, but he hadn't refinanced, and he hadn't refinanced by the deadline. Then he died, and his family moved in, and she couldn't get them out, and she couldn't sell it, and she was still paying the mortgage. I mean, let's learn from that. Let's not do that. And when we first started talking about it, she's like, I'm so embarrassed about it. I can't believe this is happening to me. I was like, your story will help somebody else avoid it. And your story sharing it will help you. Because I've been through some stuff. And you know what? You are ashamed. And you're like, how did I let this happen? I feel so bad. But talking about it, one, kind of lightens the load. And two, you always get someone, I've been through the same thing. I just didn't feel like telling anybody. I was like, well, now tell somebody. Everybody has been through most of anything you could possibly go through. So benefit from them. Don't make my mistakes, make some different mistakes. I talk about my mistakes, so make different ones. Anyway, it has been a pleasure. I am so sorry we went half an hour over, but I always love chatting with everybody. I will see you next Thursday when we will have Sarah Dill of the Dill Law Agency. She's an awesome attorney. She's a real estate attorney, done some work with me, and going to do some more. So hopefully you'll get a chance to ask her questions. I'm going to try to remember to put out, hey, send me the stuff you want me to have her talk about. So she's prepared to answer specific questions. All right. So anyway, happy Thursday. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for coming. Mwah. Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye.